You've heard about World War II. You know the major battles, the dates, and the names of the dictators. But have you ever stopped to think about what the people on the ground actually experienced? What really caused the world to suddenly catch fire? And how did the descent into absolute chaos actually play out? Because to understand the deadliest conflict in human history, you have to look at the ultimate, terrifying paradox. How exactly did a celebrated global peace deal turn into more than 30 million deaths? Chapter 1. The False Dawn. You are standing in the pre-dawn chill of a Polish forest. It is 4:45 a.m. on September the 1st, 1939. The air is damp, heavy with morning fog, and absolutely silent. Then, a low, mechanical hum begins to vibrate through the soles of your boots. It grows louder, morphing into a deafening roar as squadrons of Luftwaffe bombers blot out the rising sun. Moments later, the earth shatters. Artillery shells rain down, and a steel tide of Panzer tanks bursts through the tree line. You are standing at the exact moment the deadliest conflict in human history begins. But to understand why the world caught fire on this specific morning, we cannot start in 1939. We have to rewind 20 years. We have to go back to the end of the last World War. On June 28, 1919, the Treaty of Versailles was signed, officially ending World War I. The victorious Allied powers, primarily Britain, France, and the United States, wanted to ensure Germany could never wage war again. They stripped Germany of its overseas colonies, carved away roughly 13% of its European territory, restricted its military to a mere 100,000 men, and handed them a bill for war reparations so massive it was practically unpayable. The world celebrated peace, but not everyone was convinced. Marshal Ferdinand Foch, the supreme commander of the Allied armies, looked at the treaty and uttered a terrifyingly accurate prophecy. This is not peace. It is an armistice for 20 years. As British historian Richard Overy has extensively documented in his work The Origins of the Second World War, the peace treaties of 1919 did not resolve the underlying tensions of Europe. They simply institutionalized them. The map of Europe was redrawn, creating new, fragile nations, while leaving a deeply humiliated and economically crippled Germany at the center of the continent. The Great War hadn't ended. It had just been put on pause. Chapter 2. The Pressure Cooker. To understand what happened to Germany over the next decade, think of a nation's economy and social fabric like a closed thermodynamic system. If you take a sealed container, in this case Germany, and severely compress its volume by taking away its territory and resources, the internal pressure naturally increases. Then you introduce extreme heat, the hyperinflation crisis of 1923, where Germans literally needed wheelbarrows full of cash to buy a single loaf of bread. After a brief cooling-off period in the mid-1920s, you apply a second, even more violent blast of heat with the global Great Depression in 1929. In thermodynamics, when pressure and heat build up in a rigid container with no release valve, the container doesn't just crack. It violently explodes. In the 1920s and early 1930s, the Weimar Republic, Germany's democratic government, was buckling under this immense pressure. Millions of people were unemployed, starving, and desperate for a savior. Enter Adolf Hitler. Hitler and his National Socialist Nazi Party did not immediately take the country by force. They exploited this exact thermodynamic breaking point. They promised to restore German pride, tear up the Treaty of Versailles, and fix the economy. William L. Shirer, an American journalist who lived in Berlin during this era and later wrote The Rise and Fall of the Third Reich, witnessed this transformation firsthand. Shirer documented how Hitler masterfully weaponized the genuine suffering of the German people, funneling their humiliation into a dangerous, unified racial ideology. By January 30th, 1933, Hitler was appointed Chancellor. The container was fully primed to burst. Chapter 3. The Dominoes Wobble. Germany wasn't the only nation looking to rewrite the world order. Across the globe, aggressive regimes were testing the boundaries of the League of Nations, an international organization created after World War I, specifically designed to prevent future wars. In 1931, the Empire of Japan, seeking resources to fuel its rapidly industrializing economy, fabricated a pretense to invade Manchuria in northern China. Historians still heavily debate the exact casualty figures of the subsequent Sino-Japanese War that broke out fully in 1937, with estimates ranging wildly from several million to tens of millions of civilian and military deaths. The League of Nations condemned Japan's actions, but Japan simply walked out of the League. In 1935, fascist dictator Benito Mussolini ordered Italian forces to invade Abyssinia, modern-day Ethiopia. Again, the League of Nations protested. Again, nothing of substance was done to stop it. Watching this from Berlin, Hitler realized a crucial truth. The global police force had no teeth. British historian Ian Kershaw, in his exhaustive biographical work on Hitler, details how the dictator's foreign policy in the 1930s was essentially a series of high-stakes gambles. In March 1936, Hitler ordered German troops into the Rhineland, a demilitarized zone bordering France. His own generals were terrified, knowing the French army could easily crush them. But the French did nothing. Hitler won the gamble. Then came the defining moment of appeasement. By the fall of 1938, Hitler demanded the Sudetenland, a border region of Czechoslovakia with a large German-speaking population. Desperate to avoid another horrific European war, British Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain flew to Germany. On September 30, 1938, Britain and France signed the Munich Agreement, effectively giving Hitler the Sudetenland in exchange for a promise of peace. Chamberlain returned to London declaring he had secured peace for our time. But 6 months later, Hitler broke his promise and swallowed the rest of Czechoslovakia. The policy of appeasement had definitively failed. The dominoes were falling. Chapter 4. The Molotov-Ribbentrop Shock. By the summer of 1939, Hitler had his eyes set on his next target, Poland. But there was a massive problem. To the west of Germany were Britain and France, who had finally drawn a line in the sand and guaranteed Poland's security. To the east of Poland was the Soviet Union, led by the ruthless communist dictator Joseph Stalin. If Hitler invaded Poland, he risked fighting a two-front war, the exact strategic nightmare that had destroyed Germany in World War I. Hitler absolutely despised communism. Stalin absolutely despised fascism. They were ideological arch-enemies. Yet on August 23, 1939, the world was stunned. The two nations signed the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, a treaty of non-aggression. Publicly, it was a pledge not to attack one another. But as archivists and historians later uncovered in the ruins of the war, there was a secret protocol attached to the treaty. The Nazis and the Soviets had coldly drawn a line down a map of Eastern Europe, agreeing to carve up Poland and the Baltic states between them. With Stalin temporarily pacified, Hitler's eastern flank was secure. He had the green light he needed. The trap was set. Chapter 5. The Spark, which brings us back to the pre-dawn fog of September 1st, 1939. The German invasion of Poland introduced a terrifying new concept of warfare to the world, Blitzkrieg, or lightning war. Rather than the slow, grinding trench warfare of World War I, Blitzkrieg was designed for pure, overwhelming speed. It worked by concentrating heavily armored tanks and motorized infantry into a single, localized spearhead, supported directly by dive bombers from above. They would punch a hole through the enemy line, race deep into the rear, and cut off communications and supply lines, paralyzing the defending army before they even understood what was happening. The Polish army fought with immense bravery, but they were technologically outmatched and strategically surrounded, especially when the Soviet Union invaded from the east on September 17th. 2 days after the initial German invasion, on September 3, 1939, the British ambassador in Berlin delivered an ultimatum demanding Germany withdraw. It was ignored. At 11:15 a.m., Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain sat in front of a BBC microphone and solemnly informed the British public that they were, once again, at war with Germany. France followed suit hours later. The 20-year armistice was over. World War II had begun. Chapter 6. The Echo. The causes of World War II are not just dates on a timeline. They are a stark lesson in human psychology and geopolitical physics. The conflict did not ignite simply because one man wanted a war. It started because the victors of a previous war built a flawed system. It started because the international community ignored the dangerous rising pressure of economic collapse. It started because good people, traumatized by the horrors of the past, chose the comfort of appeasement over the hard reality of confrontation, allowing a dictator to gamble his way into absolute power. When we look back at the origins of World War II, we are forced to ask ourselves a difficult question. How much pressure can our own global systems take today before the container bursts? If you want to keep unraveling the complex hidden history of how the modern world was built and the psychological forces that drive it, hit that subscribe button and join us for the next deep dive.